But I do want to mention that there's so much that I didn't get to talk about. Some things I'm just going to mention. The development tools that I talked about are just pieces of this evolving story over time. We also had to have the ability, because we are spread across over 100 countries around the world, to have national language support built into the architecture of the system from the very beginning, something that our competitors certainly never did. The ability to display and print things changed over time to now we're using user interfaces that are mobile, and even voice activated these days. Our ability to do directories that allowed us to know who people were had to change over time. We had to protect our operating system. Well, we didn't have to, but we chose to protect the integrity of our operating system using a digital signing before anybody else in the industry did. We had to be able to do mapping of identities across platforms and across entire infrastructures. We had to be able to scale from a tiny tenth of a core or 2/10 of a core up to 192 cores with 768 threads. We had to be able to make sure that the memory that you were using on a processor was as close as possible to the actual processor, because on a power system, it didn't just by default end up that way. So over time, we had to do those things. But boy, over time, there were so many things that we provided value to you on that required architectural changes. Creating a technology refresh, which we'd done ever since 7.1 instead of a point release, required a whole architectural change in how we do fixes and updates and how those things were tied together. All of that stuff required things. But there are a couple of things I specifically want to mention. When the initial AS400 came out, as I mentioned, all of the hardware that we gave you was proprietary and unique to the AS400. So the storage that we gave you, of course, the only storage that existed at the time was directly attached storage, spinning storage. We had 520 byte storage stored on disks, 520 bytes at a time, so that we could store those extra bits that we needed to do single level store and have tags. Over time, we couldn't continue to do that. 512 byte commodity storage became the thing everybody had to use. And so we had to change our architecture to how we did storage for single level store to be able to accommodate that. IO in the days of the AS400 moved from an IO processor, where a lot of the IO that went on was actually handled by a separate processor, not the base processor of the system that was running the software. Okay, to an IO adapter, where the IO adapter did very, very little processing, and on the processor that's running your software also had to do the IO. That changed significantly. And then networking. Oh my goodness, does anybody out there in the 30 years and more remember system network architecture? It used to be interwoven into our what was called data communications. Before people called it networking, it was data communications. I'm not expecting you to read this. Look, if you look at the AS400 networking that came out, the data communications, there is no mention of TCP/IP. I was involved in the second iteration of the TCP/IP. TCP/IP was initially created as a separate product on top of AS400 at the time. Then we incorporated it into the architecture. And then we had to reincorporate it again when we rewrote it again. So TCP/IP, which is the way of doing networking in the entire world, did not exist in AS400, and it had to be rewritten 3, maybe 4, depending on how you count it, times before it finally fit into the architecture. All right, so after all of that, let me sum up a bit. If you have a wonderful, beautiful, useful architecture, and you say that architecture is going to be the way it is forever, eventually what you'll have is a very pretty thing with a lot of aesthetics that doesn't actually perform a function anymore. The IBMi architecture was created with these 5 elementary things back in the days of the AS400. Okay. But it's had to grow over time. We've had to take those 5 things and turn it into something that could not only be beautiful aesthetically, but could continue to be used throughout time. Okay, so we've had to evolve that. We've had to create new versions of it that incorporated these advances in this technology. So IBMi is now more than the architectural elements that still form its foundation. When we had our 25th anniversary several years back, I was part of talking about what 25 years on the platform meant. And I said at that time, technology is going to change. That's one thing we know in the technology industry. The thing is, the architecture of IBMi is built to change with it, but it requires constant maintenance and evolution. That is what the team in IBMi development does all the time. Where are we going into the future? Because we want all of our clients to realize that IBMi can do whatever you need it to do. Okay. And it's because of this architecture that has evolved over time.